Whew. All right. We went to bed Friday, woke up Monday, and it's getting bad. We know what we're talking about here. We're talking about the US economy, the global economy. But I'm here to tell you, we have been here before. And that is something we're going to need to remember as we go into these turbulent times. We have been here before. Many of you were working professionals in 2008 and 2009. And during that time, the global markets melted down at the concurrent and simultaneous loss of trillions of dollars of valuation in the economy due to the subprime mortgage crisis, exacerbated by the loss of Lehman Brothers, which at that time was the fourth largest investment bank in America. Now, if you have worked in the finance industry before, one of the things that you will understand and appreciate about what is happening in the markets right now is what executive leadership does in response to changing market conditions. And I mean, it happens swift. I happened to be working in technology at the time. I was at Insight Enterprises. The value-added reseller, CDW, is one of our largest competitors. We usually actually have to say that so that people knew what we did. So you think of anything as small as a Cat5 cable, something that connects a Ethernet port to a computer. Back in those days, this is 2007, all the way up to a voice over IP solution, right? So something highly integrated, connected to a cloud. You could be talking about millions of dollars, everything in between. Simultaneously at once, SMB, enterprise, and small business all stopped being able to afford POs. Our sales projections when we entered the year going into 2008 were going to be a record year for sales. And the macro economy had other plans. It was an interesting time because when the market turns terrible, the US economy still goes. And the companies that are smart and make pivots still grow. I remember watching Rich Fennessy, the CEO of Insight Enterprises, President Mark McGrath, and Vice President of the SMB market, Charles Lane, meet. My cubicle was very close to the executive wing, so I could see them going in meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. CMO Kathy Eckstein, meeting. And then they announced something that we would no longer be focused purely on revenue. And we're a Fortune 500 company. That's a tough pill to swallow at the board level. But that our particular responsibility as a group, as CSEs, were to engage in growth and acquisition as a strategy. 100% of our time and focus. Acquiring as many new logos as possible, regardless of the size of the order. And the reason being is because they projected, as all market crashes are, you can go back in history, start with Black Monday in the 80s, the dot-com bubble burst in the 90s, the aforementioned financial crisis, and where we find ourselves today. There's always a recovery. Let's skip the COVID 2020 crisis, so we'll add that too. There's always a recovery. The markets don't stay down forever, but the only way that you can survive this is that your executive leadership has to think incredibly quick. Now, in 2007, 2008, 2009, I'm a younger professional. And in 2015, I found myself in the room. You know that room in the larger companies where they close the door and make big decisions. I found myself in that room. I worked incredibly hard to get into that room. And I want to take you all behind the scenes, especially those who sell things, so that you understand exactly what executive leadership is doing simultaneously all over markets, all over sectors right now. Executive leadership is looking at the capital base of the company. How much money do we have? How much money did we lose? How much runway do we have left? What are the strategic responses we need to make from a capital structure standpoint right away? Next at the table, so that's CFO. Next at the table, the COO. What we're talking about here is operations. Now they're going to be looking at is the operation set up to run it optimally, because we're going to have to make some tough choices. And we know what those tough choices are. We know that one of the easiest levers to pull on, and unfortunate levers to pull on in order to ride out a crisis, is to get rid of people, because people are the most expensive thing that businesses have. Technology is hard to get rid of because it's the backbone of the information being the lifeblood of the company. That's just how it works. So now we're going at a cost. Now we're on to the COO. we're looking at operations in the end, trying to understand, is the operation set up optimally for the next person who has to stand up, the CHRO, head of human resources. They have to have a discussion. There has to be a legitimate discussion around what resources are in the critical pathway to the company's success and what resources could be reduced. I hope that there are CFOs that are forward thinking now that are looking at potentially what resources would take a reduction in pay instead of an elimination of that pay, because most resources carry a significant amount of tribal knowledge, intellectual capital that's not necessarily transferred from their minds into the systems like a document management system like SharePoint. That's what's happening right now. Next up to have a conversation is your chief revenue officer, your chief product officer, your chief sales officer, depending on what type of organization it is. But their responsibility is to look at anything that's wasting money, anything that's causing friction in the sales process or the revenue driving process. Also looking at strategic alliances. Next up after that person is the chief marketing officer, who will examine the marketing strategy to make sure that it is optimal for the current market conditions, not previous market conditions, current market conditions. And this is happening right now. So if you're working in a company over the next couple of weeks as you're ingesting this and you're noticing that executives are going behind that closed door, know these are the conversations that are being had. And how do I know this? One of the things I did as a professional was I always honored my non-compete and non-disclosure. So when I was working at Black Knight Financial Services and inside of that room, I took copious notes, handwritten notes. Everybody was using their technology, their Surface computers or their laptops to take notes. I always handwrote everything that was being asked of me. One of the reasons why is because handwriting things in that repetition commits it to memory. So I'm walking around the organization, talking to 800 plus resources across 9 divisions about what we're going to do. We definitely did not want to drop the ball. And by we, I mean me. Because what you're looking at here are actual notes of what was asked of me. How I know what's happening in the markets right now in the executive room is I was in the room. I was the one resource at the table who did not have direct line ownership of any human resources. I was the strategic mind and the executing mind. I had to listen to everybody's strategy, everybody's overview, and come up with a synthesized plan for how we were going to move forward and fast. This is one of the things artificial intelligence really doesn't have a background in. And it's an amazing day if you've been there. These markets are going to get incredibly tight real fast. And what are you going to do? If you're an organization that has several hundred employees or 100 employees or even 75 employees, you got to get to this and got to get to it quick. Because it's a cascading effect. You need to be looking at your revenue model, your operating cost analysis, Performant, Error Group. Love working with you all. I believe there's amazing opportunity. Market intelligence. What is the market actually doing? How are your competitors responding? What are your customers doing? What are your largest customers doing? Reviewing your business performance metrics and KPIs. And if you don't have them in place, it's going to be really hard to make the right decisions about what pathway forward. And then ultimately engaging in business process mapping and standard operating procedures. You need that. You need that because you need to know what's working and what's not working. Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. 20% of what the organization does generates 80% of its results. So you're definitely going to need to know what that 20% is so you can focus on that, because 80% of what the organization does generates 20% of results. Now, let's take it a step further. So I'm in the room, I'm listening to all of the leaders across all of the different organizational units, including CCM, Client Configurations Management, our solutions team, our consulting team. We were a highly matrixed organization. And our largest clients were the largest banks and title companies in America, right? So JP Morgan's on the phone. Wells Fargo's leadership is on the phone. Bank of America's leadership is on that phone. Trying to figure out what we are going to do to help them from a technology partner standpoint, continue to drive revenue so they can meet their performance targets in a down market. And it's incredibly challenging to do. But the interesting thing about working in those types of environments is you also learn how the decision-making framework works. So you can do it at the business level where you're talking about what do we do it from a plan standpoint. You see, we were in a challenging environment in 2017, 2018. We were in an incredibly challenging environment at our division. There are some challenges we made, some products that we released that necessarily didn't generate what we thought we would. The market shifted very quickly, and so we had to get to work. My responsibility, looking at our debt obligations and restructuring them, examining our operating costs for reduction, looking for ways to better manage capital. I had to look at how to enhance our product pricing to increase our customer mix, streamline the product line. I had to accelerate the growth of our high potential products. How do you do that in a down market where you're losing market budget? Looking for new products, new reaches, new strategic alliances, and ultimately being responsible for leading the marketing strategy and business development. Those are my marching orders out of that meeting. But I'll never forget one of the most incredible opportunities I got was one time the president of the unit in this really challenging time comes to my desk. He had just flown in from Jacksonville, and he says, "Chris, can you come into my office?" Now, anybody who knows, you're like, immediately. I mean, that's your immediate reaction, right? Especially an executive who works out of Jacksonville. But we had a great relationship. I wasn't prepared to hear what I heard. And out of respect for non-disclosure, even though the company has since sold itself, we started at 2015 at 930 million. And in 2023, when they exited, it was 11.78 billion. Everything I know about business, I learned from Black Knight Financial Services. So he asked me to come up with a way to reduce operating costs by 20 to 40% in 180 days. Now, the penalty for not being able to come up with that, I don't need to disclose. It wasn't my personal penalty. I wasn't being asked to come up with the solution if I wasn't part of the group that was going to be remaining should we not be successful. So what did I do? I went to think about a concept I had been thinking about for a very long time. It started off as a final in a college project for an algorithm and programming class, moved on to become the foundation of a presentation I made to reservoir engineers at Aramco, and it became the general approach, which is that we were going to examine the market, examine our operations, identify the 20% of activities in our market and in our operation that generate the 80% of results that our clients and our competitors who attract our clients generate revenues from, and turn them into candidates for automation. Robotic process automation, cognitive automation, and enhanced automation. This was automation for the sake of continuing efficiency in response to the fact that when there are challenging economic conditions inside of a company, you have to be willing to change quickly because you have to save the company. That's the unfortunate thing about business. You have to save the company. When the credit market starts seizing up and operating capital is harder to come by to fund payroll, you have to think about the company. And so what I looked at was an opportunity to implement something that could invert Pareto's principle. Could I look at a way for the 80% of activities that only generate 20% of the results to be automated? And then what would it require once we implemented this automation technology, the bedrock of that being IBM's core technology stack, and create a center of excellence decentralized across an entire organization of almost 3,500 resources who would be looking at the technology division, the division I was in, to come up with a solution to rapidly deploy across the organization. So you have to create a center of excellence. Leadership, how IT and business partner. How do you promote what's been built? How do you provide the technology resources? And most importantly, how do you train and change manage through communications? These are the things that executive leadership right now in every company is thinking about. And everybody's going to run back and say, hey, we can use AI for that. Slow down. AI has to have the knowledge transferred from the humans who hold it. There is tribal knowledge and frontline expertise that there are critical humans hold. Executive leadership, I'm imploring you across markets not to respond so quickly with layoffs. Engage in negotiation. There are highly committed resources to your operation who may not be considered in the critical path, but have critical knowledge base. Attrition is expensive. It costs 3x what you're paying a human to get rid of them in terms of replacing them. Now, in a down market, you're not necessarily looking to replace, you're looking to increase the workload. Or you may say, hey, AI can do all of that. And potentially it could. But today, it can't. Otherwise, it would already be in the operation. So I'm here to implore executive leadership to engage in the discussions around how do we augment and multiply the productivity of our existing human resources. To the HR leaders, can you engage in negotiations for a reduction of salary or even a fraction of salary so that you can retain the organizational knowledge that powers the business forward? I've got to head off to an executive leadership meeting with my team. Know this is one of the first things we're going to be talking about today. Have a great one.